There's no way. What are you doing? This is the Sunday devotion. Are you seeing this? No. Where's he going? Let's go. Sheesh. Saw that on TikTok. I have no idea. Play on, player. Let him cook, baby. Boop. He's not even worried about that. What is up? Welcome back to the Sunday Devotion. My name is Josh French. So glad you stopped by to hang out for a few minutes. And I also hope that you enjoy Bob Ross as much as I do. We are in our series called Waitlisted, where we are talking about waiting. Yeah, I don't like it either, but it's part of life and we have to do it, so let's talk about it. And in this series, we're going to get to our third point today. We know that God has a plan, even if we have to wait for it. Sometimes God's plan doesn't work out according to our timing, but that's okay because a lot of times God's plans are way better than ours anyway. And we know that while we are waiting, this is part 2, that God is faithful. There are so many promises in the Bible that we can go look back to and know that God was faithful to those people. And yes, we are looking at Bible characters. We talked about Abraham and Sarah, and today we are talking about a man named David. Maybe you've heard about David, and we're going to learn from David that while we're waiting, God is listening. So that's our third part. In the story of David, we're going to talk about, I'm going to hit 5 points of David's life that maybe you've heard of, maybe you haven't. First of all, number 1, you need to know that David was promised to become king at a very young age. Like he was a boy when God told him that he would be king. And he had to wait a very long time for this promise to be fulfilled. Also, number 2, David defeated Goliath. Maybe that's the story you're familiar with. The king at the time was Saul. Saul's army was under attack from the Philistines, and the Philistines had a Shaq on their team. I don't know how tall he was. I don't know if he had low post moves and would dunk on everybody, and is eventually in the NBA Hall of Fame. But Goliath was a big dude, and David, a boy, defeated him. You've probably heard of that story. All right, the third thing that you need to know is that Saul, the king at the time, got really jealous of David. And it was his own fault because Saul had heard that David was a very talented musician. So Saul brings David to play the harp, and man, people just really fell in love with him. He was a talented kid. I assume he was good looking, had a wonderful personality, knew when to tell a joke, had great taste in music, all the things that, whatever. But anyway, Saul sees how much people enjoy being around David, and he becomes very jealous of David, and it eventually becomes part 4, Saul versus David. Saul hated David so much, he literally tried to have him killed. David was on the run because Saul had sent men to kill him. And not like, I'm going to kill you, like, I'm going to employ men to throw spears at your face. And that's exactly what Saul did, and David was on the run, and he eventually escaped. So anyway, here's part 5. The cool part is David becomes king. So even after this promise from God as a boy, God delivered. David became king. So how does this fit into while we're waiting, God is listening? Because David wrote many psalms, and in those psalms, he always talks about how merciful God is, how beautiful God is, how great God is, and how God has continually delivered him from death, from being banished, from being left alone, from feeling depressed, from just being sad, from not having it all together, from feeling unworthy. A lot of things David prayed to God while he was waiting. David is often described as a man after God's own heart. See, God had great love and favor for David. And one time he had that for Saul, but Saul's heart changed and fell out of favor with God. And that was why God chose to replace Saul with David. But during that time when David was on the run and literally being hunted, and he also fought a giant, David prayed the whole time. And we can read that in Psalms. And I think maybe one of my favorite Psalms that David had written is Psalm 116. I love the Lord because he hears my voice and my prayer for mercy, because he bends down to listen. I will pray as long as I have breath. Death wrapped its ropes around me. The terrors of the grave overtook me. I saw only trouble and sorrow, and then I called on the name of the Lord. Please, Lord, save me. How kind the Lord is, how good he is, so merciful, this God of ours. The Lord protects those of childlike faith. I was facing death, and he saved me. The story of David is a remarkable one. And if we look at just the parts that we've talked about today, he literally faced a gigantic enemy. He actually had spears thrown at his head. He fought depression and terror and fear and what he thought was certain death, and he continued to pray, and God continued to listen. If we want to live like David and have this prayer life like David while we are waiting, let's remember to do two things. Number one, when you pray to God, share your situation. Yes, God already knows what you're going through. God already knows where you are, the enemy that you face, the things you got going on. He's aware. You still need to tell him. Go to God with courage. Be brave, like we talked about last week. Be brave for 3 seconds to even admit, God, I'm facing certain death here. I am afraid, and I need you to rescue me. While we're waiting, while we're terrified, while we are fearful, while there is a lot of chaos going on, God is still listening to us. So share your situation with God. And number two, share your feelings. What do those feel like? If we read the Psalms from David, they're so real. You can almost hear his heart beat through those words. Read those words passionately, like that, like those are yours, and you can really feel the gratitude and the fear and the joy and just the need for a rescue in David's words. Share your feelings, because that is what he did. And he really connected to God, and it's such an intimate and there's such a romance about the way that David writes these psalms and these songs to God. While we're waiting, God is listening. Connect with God. Connect with a heart that longs to connect with you. Share your situation, share your feelings, and be confident that in your waiting, God is listening. Until we meet again, be well.